Today I would like to recommend to you a heart-wrenching comic, Binding the Dragon for Queen. It ranks among the best in terms of cruelty index in my heart. The previously recommended Era and Yusha are cruel but not scumbag. But the protagonist of this comic, Xianlong, not only was she tortured cleanly, even the scumbag confessed clearly. The story tells about Yan Yuan, the Emperor of the Ninth Heaven, 2 lifetimes of sadomasochism with Dragon General Xianlong, the first lifetime. Emperor Yan Yuan ignores the will of heaven, forced to write Xuanlong's name on the marriage book. By animation, and Xianlong formed a Taoist couple in Sanqing Stone. Anime gods and demons will fight soon. Xianlong fought bloody battles as a general. In the end, the demons were driven away, but he was seriously injured. Die in the arms of the Emperor of Heaven and fall into reincarnation. Karmic fire burns and leaves eternal scars. The Emperor abdicated 3 days later. Leave the divine book and invite yourself into reincarnation. Animation searching for Xianlong in all directions. The second reincarnation of Yan Du became the human Emperor Yu Baidong. Xianlong is an ordinary dragon with a miserable life experience. There are scars on the face caused by the fire from the past life. As a result, he has been rejected by his family for being ugly since he was born. His mother was even more reluctant to name him. In addition, I almost had dystocia when giving birth to him. The father died again trying to save their mother and son. Therefore, Xianlong has become the most unpopular one among the dragon clan. His mother beat and scolded him. Brothers and sisters don't like him either. Finally, on a night of heavy rain, that woman was drunk, beating the young Xianlong hard with a whip and reprimanded him for killing his husband. Xianlong begged his mother not to abandon him, but she didn't feel pity. Instead, he used his sword to cut off Xuanlong's undeveloped horns. Just like that, Xianlong endured the pain in his heart being driven out of the dragon clan in the heavy rain. Then he wandered all the way to the foot of Jinghua Mountain. Since then, I have been practicing alone in the cold pool for thousands of years. Afraid of scaring others because of his ugly appearance, so he rarely goes out. One day when I went out, I picked up a seriously injured human being and came back. Although Xianlong has a cold personality, he is kind-hearted. Use Shinko dragon scales as medicine to revive him. Since that day, humans have been following him. Xianlong doesn't think so. I just feel that the noise of the human race is very annoying. The name of the human race is Yan Yuan, and he is the emperor of the world. On the wedding night, Queen Ningjiu fell critically ill and fell into a coma. Dragon heart is needed as medicine to cure the disease. Yan Yuan deliberately hurt herself after learning about it. Climbing mountains and wading through rivers to reach the foot of Jinghua Mountain. It's because of him, Xianlong, who has been practicing for nearly 10,000 years. Yan Yuan approached him and named him Han Bo. Tell him lovingly that I like you. At that moment Xuanlong's heart has been silent for thousands of years, jumped hard for no reason. Just because no one has ever said such words to him in thousands of years of loneliness. But Xianlong doesn't know that people's hearts are sinister. That person said he liked him. But what I was thinking about was how to pull out his scales and dig out his heart. Unconsciously, a month flew by. Yan Yuan's injuries have already healed. But he stayed to make excuses, pretending that he was still injured internally. Xianlong saw him crying out in pain all day long. So I fed him a bowl of grey decoction every day. Yan Yuan was frightened. Xianlong prepared sweet sugar cubes for him. It can be said that he has responded to Yan Yuan's requests this month. Human hearts are made of flesh. Gradually, Yan Yuan also felt the kindness of Xianlong. It's not an evil dragon like the rumors during the interview. So when I lie down to rest at night, Yan Yuan looked at the man's lonely back. I couldn't help but wrap my arms around his thin waist. I want to dispel that loneliness for him. Yan Yuan cherishes Queen Ningjiu. I've always been in love with him and never crossed the line. So far clean and well. But when he saw Xianlong, he couldn't help but want to protect and possess. Xuanlong's body froze without exception. White anime, the roots of the ears are slightly reddish, visible to the naked eye. Except for the first conditioned reflex to push Yan Yuan away after causing his injuries to worsen. Later, Xianlong no longer resisted Yan Yuan's approach. Even now he is not used to having people by his side. I can't get used to the feeling of irregular heartbeat. Yan Yuan's gentle voice sounded in his ears. Do you like me, Sukman? Xuanlong's green pupils widened blankly. My mind is in chaos. He doesn't know, he probably likes it after all. No creature would hate someone who treats him sincerely. Abo, are you willing to marry me? A word from the human emperor Yan Yuan. Xuanlong's heart suddenly became confused. Just because no one has ever said such words to him in nearly 10,000 years of loneliness. Yan Yuan was originally the emperor of heaven in the 9 heavens. In order to find his lover Xianlong, he fell into reincarnation. He became an emperor on earth, but was blinded by the way of heaven. Let him mistake the prime minister's son Ningjiu for the love of his life. Maybe it was a trick of heaven, and under the arrangement of fate, he came to his true love Xianlong again. After a few months of getting along, he unconsciously developed a fondness for Xianlong. In this way, he confessed to Xianlong. Ask Xianlong if he also likes him. Xianlong doesn't know. Maybe he likes it after all. No living being would hate someone who treats him sincerely. Seeing that Xianlong didn't answer, Yan Yuan leaned forward and got closer. Frankly speaking, in their human race, if two people fall in love, they can become husband and wife, never separated. His voice is as gentle as Yu Bai Dong, the most sincere music in the world. Abo, are you willing to marry me? When Xianlong heard this, his heart suddenly became confused. The words husband and wife are too unfamiliar to him. He lived alone for thousands of years. He never thought that there would be creatures willing to accompany him in the future. Cheeks feel inexplicably hot. Xianlong turned away and stopped looking at him. He said lightly that if you are willing, it doesn't matter to me. Yan Yuan chuckled, then. After a period of in-depth communication, there is no blood on Xuanlong's face. Black hair is scattered messily around the body. It was the first time Yan Yuan saw him so weak. I feel a little sad, unconsciously concerned about whether you feel uncomfortable. Xianlong opened his half-drowsed eyes. Seeing that Yan Yuan was worried, she just said it was okay. After a while, Yan Yuan wanted to ask him to get up and clean up, but found that he had fallen asleep. Xianlong usually sleeps very lightly. If Yan Yuan turns over slightly, he will wake up. Never slept so deeply. Yan Yuan thought this might be his only chance. He stared at Xuanlong's face for a long time. That's Zhang Jiying's restrained face, wearing a mask, looks like a god descending to earth. He has always been curious, why does Xianlong wear that golden bronze mask? I never took it off even to sleep. Now seems like a good opportunity to find out. But he no longer has that intention because there are more important things waiting for him to do. Half an hour later, Yan Yuan got onto the bed with gentle hands and feet. Walking towards the stone table not far away, available after Yan Yuan came, including the brocade quilt on the stone bed. Yan Yuan said that the stone bed was too hard. Xianlong just went to the human world to get it. Until then, the dragon had been sleeping on a bare stone bed. Yan Yuan pressed the dagger on the stone table. It feels like it weighs 1,000 kilograms, but he still forced himself to walk towards the man. Between Xuanlong's life and Ning Zhiyu's life, he chose the latter. Xianlong has been practicing for nearly 10,000 years and shouldn't be so weak. But his power is gradually weakening as the calamity approaches. The pain in my body became more vivid. Even the wounds left by pulling out the scales have been unable to heal. Yan Yuan stopped quietly beside the bed. His eyes fell on the wound on Xuanlong's left chest. That wound is right on the heart. Yan Yuan thought that as long as she stabbed the dagger in he will die, it won't be too painful. Then rip out his heart, then you can go back and save Au. But when the dagger is raised high in the hand, but he has been unable to fall, that kind of deep discomfort almost drowns me. It seems that he and Xianlong didn't meet each other for the first time. But in the previous life, we have known each other for a long time. You Bai Dong, otherwise how could he be so soft-hearted? But then I thought of Ning Zhiyu. He still gritted his teeth and raised the dagger in his hand. He stabbed Xianlong hard in the chest. The man on the stone bed let out a low whimper. Looks very painful. Yan Yuan's movements were so sudden that he was stunned by the animation. Xuanlong's miserable expression was reflected in his eyes. After a moment of confusion, Xianlong opened his eyes without warning. I asked him puzzledly why he wasn't sleeping yet. Yan Yuan quickly hid the dagger in his sleeve. She pursed her lips tightly and said, "Look at how beautiful you are." Xianlong didn't notice anything strange. He was already used to the pain in his chest. Yan Yuan always likes to say naughty words to him. Xianlong was ashamed in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He just said lightly, "Go to sleep." Then he was overwhelmed and fell asleep again. Yan Yuan breathed a sigh of relief and did not dare to act rashly again. He felt vaguely annoyed at missing this opportunity. But I feel relaxed somehow. Just wait, just wait. Suppress messy thoughts. Yan Yuan went to get a clean white cloth, carefully clean up the blood stains on Xuanlong's body. He went up and hugged him from behind and fell asleep. Yan Yuan bids farewell to Xianlong and proposed that Xianlong return to the palace with him. After the two became husband and wife. When Xianlong woke up the next day, he felt something strange about his body. It's not convenient to walk. He had heard people say that it was a pleasant thing. Now it seems that it is mostly spiritual happiness. Yan Yuan loves to eat the steamed buns and lotus leaf porridge in Jinggula. Xianlong got up and went to Chang'an City to buy breakfast. In the past, he would not go out once every 100 years. Anime now has to travel to the human world 3 times a day. Yu Bai's anime. Yan Yuan has a very picky mouth. Yu Bai would rather be hungry than touch the things he dropped. Yan Yuan was still sleeping when I came back. Xianlong placed the food box on the stone table. The fingers with clear joints tore open the skirt of his clothes, showing the position of the heart. Pick up the dagger that Yan Yuan used to dig out the dragon's heart last night. The palm of my hand gently crossed the air between my heart. The skin was instantly covered with beautiful black scales. Dragon scales on the heart are the best medicine for healing. Now it has almost been plucked out. He swallowed the groan into his throat, sprinkled the dragon scales into the bowl. Suddenly Yan Yuan's voice came from behind. "What are you doing?" Xianlong calmly hid the dagger in his sleeve and returned it. "Wake him up softly for breakfast." Yan Yuan noticed something was wrong. Ask him what he was doing just now, and he looks so bad. Xianlong was silent for a moment, avoiding his eyes. Yan Yuan knew Xuanlong's temper well and had to give up. While eating, he asked Xianlong that the country must not be without a king for a day. He had to go back to the palace. Xuanlong's hand trembled instantly. The chopsticks hit the ground. Then he picked up the chopsticks without changing his expression. He just replied lightly, "I'll take you back." "Are you leaving in the afternoon?" Yan Yuan was a little angry when she saw his reaction. He put down his chopsticks and said aggrievedly, "I have to leave." "Wouldn't you be reluctant to part with it at all?" Xianlong was silent for a moment, then raised his eyes to look at him. "If you leave, I can't keep you." Yan Yuan knows that he likes her, but I can't quite read his emotions. He always looks cold and indifferent to everything. This made Yan Yuan feel angry for no reason. "Who said I have to go alone?" As soon as these words came out, not only the dragon, even Yan Yuan himself was stunned. He originally planned to trick Xianlong into returning to the palace and then find an opportunity to dig out the dragon's heart. But just now it seemed like he really couldn't let him go. "If you are still angry about this, you must be a demon." The two sides looked at each other for a moment, and Yan Yuan came to his senses first. "Reach out and hold Xuanlong's hand holding the chopsticks." He smiled and said that we are now husband and wife. "Of course we want to be together. Don't you want to stay with me until we grow old?" Xianlong will stay with each other until old age. The fourth word is silently recited in the heart. My ears felt inexplicably hot, but I calmly lowered my eyes and said, "I am willing." Half an hour later, 10,000 feet in the sky, a giant black dragon shuttles through the clouds carrying a stunning-looking human race man on his back. As we get closer to the palace, Yan Yuan's mind became heavier and heavier. He is riding on the back of a black dragon. Jade white fingers gently touched the dragon's half-broken right corner. I couldn't help feeling sad and asked Xianlong why one of the horns on his head was broken. Xianlong responded with an understatement. "Frankly speaking, it was cut off by my mother when I was a child." Yan Yuan's heart suddenly tightened. "Why?" Xianlong was silent for a while, calmly said, "Maybe it's because his mother doesn't like him." That day, she went crazy with alcohol and cut off his dragon horn with a sword, and expelled him from the dragon clan. He didn't see her again after that. I didn't even have the chance to ask her why she did that to me. Yan Yuan's throat is blocked. I want to say some nice words to make him happy, but I can't say anything. I had no choice but to bend down and touch the broken horn of Xianlong. "Hard way, you still have me, I like you." He wouldn't dare to say anything more. When that day comes, the truth will be too cruel. Xianlong seems to be indifferent to many things on the surface. Since the animation, he will remember every word Yan Yuan said in his heart. Just because no one ever took him seriously, Yan Yuan treats him well and is willing to get close to him. He took it seriously, and besides, he loved Yan Yuan deeply. There is no need for any reason. It's an instinct engraved deep in the soul, just like the scars on his face burned by karmic fire. Immortal and immortal. Xianlong, who is about to ascend to immortality, fights for his lover, leaving the cold pool where I have practiced for thousands of years. Willing to follow the human emperor to the palace. The emperor thought he was just acting on the occasion, coaxing people to come to the palace to pull out scales and dig out hearts to save their lover. But little did he know that he could not help but give up his sincerity. Xianlong takes the swallow kite, soars into the clouds and rides in the mist, setting off from Handan. Not long after, we arrived over the imperial city. Suddenly a white light flashed. The two of them appeared directly in the emperor's bedroom after Yan Yuan placed Xianlong. By animation left in a hurry because the queen was critically ill. The news that Yan Yuan returned to the palace safely spread quickly. When he arrived at Wanfeng Hall, the imperial doctors were already waiting for him, and bluntly said that if there is no longer a dragon heart that can be used as medicine, the queen will die soon. Yan Yuan's heart suddenly tightened. I remember Xianlong trusting me so much, frowning and asking the imperial doctor in a deep voice, "Is there anything other than digging out dragon hearts? Is there no other way?" Imperial Doctor Zonghua silenced Su Tu. Tell him that if he really can't find the dragon heart and dragon scales, he can. When Yan Yuan heard this, her body showed evidence. Zonghua added that the closer the dragon scales are to the heart, the better the effect will be. If you take it for a month, the queen will wake up. Yan Yuan's brows relaxed, her eyes mixed with joy and sorrow. If that's the case, not only does Xianlong not have to die, but he can also save Ayu. It's really the best of both worlds. He believed that dragon scales should be able to grow back just like human fingernails. It's better to have a painful bowel movement than to dig out a dragon's heart. Even if the scales are removed, they will grow again. Once you dig out your heart, there will no longer be any coldness in the world. The side halls of Qiankuan Palace are not as luxurious as the main hall, but it is also an extremely spacious and scattered building. For the first time, Xianlong came into contact with the place where Yan Yuan grew up. My heart, which has always been lonely and boring, is rarely curious. Can't help but observe. It turns out that man was raised in a place like this. No wonder he's a little more arrogant. But in Xuanlong's opinion, Yan Yuan is cute no matter what. Xianlong is approaching because of the great calamity recently. I feel more and more that my spiritual power is getting weaker. But just flying such a short distance already made him physically and mentally exhausted. Seeing a bed in the palace, he went over to sit cross-legged and meditate. Unexpectedly, I fell asleep while sitting, and the sky was getting dark. The hall, which had been quiet for a long time, suddenly heard the sound of opening the door. Xianlong woke up instantly. Open your eyes and look at the door warily. It's Yan Yuan who's back. I don't know when that man changed into a shining dragon robe with a jade crown on his head and a slender body. It makes him, who is already fair-skinned, look even more noble and extraordinary at the moment. Yan Yuan strolled to Xuanlong's side. Surround him naturally. Put your face on Xuanlong's shoulder. Smiling lowly, he asked Xianlong if he missed him. Xianlong let him surround him. There is an imperceptible softness in the cold eyes. He let out an almost inaudible hum. It turned out he was acting. Hear the other party answer like this. Yan Yuan couldn't help feeling happy in her heart. I couldn't help but leaned into his ear and whispered, I miss you too. Listen to his answer. Xianlong smiled unconsciously. Yan Yuan was stunned for a moment, looking at the man's extraordinary heroic profile in disbelief. Your heart is pounding, you just laughed. This is the first time you smile at me. Xuanlong's eyes showed a bit of serenity. Hasn't he laughed before? It seems like this. There was nothing that made him happy before, but it's different now. This person said he likes him and wants to care about him. Yan Yuan could not suppress her inner impulse to get close to Xianlong. He came closer and said seriously, you look so beautiful when you smile. You have to smile more in the future. Xianlong has never been praised like this before. There was a slight blush on the face. He opened his face unnaturally and said Suddenly Yan Yuan pinched his chin, gently pulled his face back, said tenderly, I want to do something to warm up their relationship. Yan Yuan knew that she was wrong, but riding a horse is always difficult to control. He comforted himself in his heart. Since the animation, when Ning Jiyu wakes up, he will definitely have a clean break with Xianlong. Is now just to stabilize. Xianlong just does these unnecessary things. The emperor on earth saves his queen, coaxing the infatuated Xianlong to come to the palace. On the first day I came here, I ate them all. After a hearty battle, Xianlong looked as if he was exhausted, just like last time. Yan Yuan nervously asked him if he felt uncomfortable. I thought to myself that I had obviously been very careful this time. Xianlong couldn't bear his worries and said in a dumb voice that it was okay. It hurts, but my heart is sweet. Yan Yuan carefully pulled up the brocade quilt for him. In the anime, I suddenly saw the wound on Xuanlong's heart and couldn't help but prove it. Concerned about why this injury hasn't healed after so long. Not only is it not getting better, it is also getting worse. If left untreated, I'm afraid it will fester. Xianlong didn't want to tell him about the approaching catastrophe, which worried him, so I thought it was because of the weather. Yan Yuan originally thought it was a monster with powerful spells. If you are injured, you will heal quickly. That doesn't seem to be the case now. He suddenly felt worried. Then he put his arms around Xuanlong's neck lovingly. Wen said, tomorrow I will ask the imperial doctor to get some medicine to apply on you. Mortal medicine is of no use to monsters. Xianlong did not explain. That didn't stop him from feeling warm in his heart. When he is about to fall asleep, suddenly he heard Yan Yuandi say something in his ear. Abo, I want to discuss something with you. Xianlong couldn't help but open his eyes and ask him what was going on. Those green eyes are always cold, but Yan Yuan can see the ultimate tenderness in it. He had already vaguely guessed where the wound on Xuanlong's heart came from. An imperial physician talks about the dragon scales in the heart. I guessed it from the moment it was the best medicine. He finally understood why he was taking after that dark decoction. Such a serious injury can be completely healed in 3 days. It turns out that they were all exchanged for the dragon scales from Xuanlong's heart. His injury is healed, but Xuanlong's injuries from this have not healed yet. It is difficult for Yan Yuan to talk to him again, but then I thought about my lover who was dying after all. He said it. Can Abo give me some dragon scales? Xianlong was stunned when he heard this. Then confusion appeared in his eyes. What do you want dragon scales for? Yan Yuan looked at him and found it difficult to tell the truth. So he lied and said that a good friend of his was seriously ill. If you don't get treatment, you will die. The human emperor and Xianlong had in-depth exchanges so many times, but I've never even seen his face. This time I finally took the opportunity to take off the mask. But when he saw the terrible scar, he confirmed. It's not fear but heart-wrenching pain. It hurt so much that it felt like his soul had been shattered. After the two people had a hearty exchange, Yan Yuan gently hugged Xuanlong's waist. Asked him why he always wears a mask. As he spoke, he wanted to reach out and pick it off, but as soon as he touched it, Xianlong grabbed his wrist. He admitted that he was afraid of scaring him because of his ugly appearance. Yan Yuan swore to him that he would not. Xianlong turned his head and looked at the bright yellow tent above. After a long time he calmly said, all creatures in the world hate him when they see him, only Yan Yuan does not dislike it. He was afraid that Yan Yuan would not like him anymore after seeing his true appearance. Yan Yuan didn't expect Xianlong to be so cold on the outside but so sensitive on the inside. Tokizumi anime. But then he said without thinking, I promise no matter what you become, Abo is still Abo. My love for you will never change. Xianlong couldn't help but look at Yan Yuan after hearing this. Those warm and watery eyes are full of sincerity. Yan Yuan slowly stretched out her hand. He didn't hide. The dark gold mask engraved with ancient Sanskrit characters was finally taken off. Even though Yan Yuan was mentally prepared, when seeing the full face of Xianlong still couldn't help but gasp. Just looking at the left side of his face, he looks brave and cold, with a straight nose. That is an excellent appearance. If you were a mortal, there must be many girls waiting in line to marry him. But the scar on the skin on the right side of his face is really terrifying. Almost ruined all the beauty. Yan Yuan didn't feel ugly. He just felt a pain in his heart for no reason. It's as if the soul is being torn apart. It gave him the urge to cry bitterly. How so? Compared to Yan Yuan's reaction, Qianlong was very indifferent. He laughed at himself and said that maybe he had done something wrong in his previous life. God punished him by leaving scars on his face. Yan Yuan instantly reached out and hugged him. Abo, I feel sorry for you. Qianlong said calmly that if you don't dislike me, you won't be afraid. He doesn't care about the rest of the people. In the blink of an eye, the sun has risen 3 poles. The sun outside is getting more and more fierce. Yan Yuan puts on her dragon robe and prepares to go to court. Before leaving, tells Qianlong to come back and have dinner with him at noon. After walking a few steps, he stopped again, thinking of Queen Ning Jiyu's physical condition. He turned around and mentioned the dragon scale thing. Qianlong thought about the tenderness just now. I feel like the pain of pulling out my scales is nothing. I will give it to you tenderly. At noon, inside the alleyway of the Vermilion Palace wall, Yan Yuan wears a dragon robe and sits on the dragon ladder. A group of palace maids and eunuchs were walking towards the Jimuan Palace. Suddenly the eunuch Chen Yan next to him asked him cautiously, since Mr. Han has been favored, can you give him a title? Yan Yuan's face instantly turned cold after hearing this, condescendingly saying that he promised. I want to be with Ning Jiyu for the rest of my life. Unable to break his promise, Chen Yan leaned over and quietly retreated. Yan Yuan looked away, knowing that he owed Qianlong, but since ancient times, monsters have taken different paths. If it weren't for Ning Jiyu, maybe the two of them will never have any intersection in this life. Not to mention status. He promised that Ning Jiyu would not bear the burden. First, according to the original plan, he was going to take the dragon's heart to save his lover's life. But several months of getting along with Qianlong made him move into hiding. He wants Qianlong to live well. Wait until Ning Jiyu is healthy. He separated from Qianlong and set him free. But he considered everything, but only Xuanlong's sincerity was missed. How to place this sincerity, he doesn't know, but right now I don't care about that much anymore. He turned around and told Chen Yan not to tell Ning Jiyu about Qianlong. Then he breathed a sigh of relief silently, but Xincha, who had just relaxed, took advantage of the loophole. Unconsciously, I remembered those times with Qianlong. Yan Yuan was suddenly upset. Yubai was tempted to think that he might really be possessed by evil spirits. Otherwise, how could my mind be filled with the shadow of Qianlong? Qianlong pulled out 30 dragon scales from his heart for the sake of the human emperor. At that moment, blood rushed into the liver and intestines, and the heart was broken. After the emperor fell in love with him, he went to court. The black dragon catastrophe is coming, and after this, he will attain enlightenment and become an immortal. As a result, the habits gradually degenerated and became similar to those of human beings. Not long after Yan Yuan left, Qianlong fell into a deep sleep. At about noon, there was sudden lightning and thunder in the sky. Qianlong suddenly woke up. He remembered his promise to Yan Yuan to hand over the dragon scales to him at noon. Animation then endured the discomfort and got out of bed, cleaned up the body hastily. Then he transformed into a black iron dagger in his hand. After smoothly peeling off 15 dragon scales, the movement gradually slowed down. The severe pain in his chest made his wrists tremble continuously. Every slice he cut made his liver and intestines break. But he promised Yan Yuan to give him 30 tablets, so I endured the pain and continued cutting piece by piece. There was blood pouring from the back of my chest. The originally clear water was dyed extremely red. Then he finally stopped, and in the blink of an eye it was noon. Qianlong was sleeping when Yan Yuan left. When I came back, I saw him still sleeping. So he stood on the edge of the bed and gently shook the man on the bed. Abo wakes up. Xuanlong's face is pale. He said weakly that you are back, and then did not wait for Yan Yuan to speak. Then he handed him a wooden box. Yan Yuan asked him confusedly what this was. Qianlong said lightly. Yan Yuan couldn't help being surprised. Open it and take a look. There are 30 clean dragon scales neatly stacked inside. Exudes a familiar light cold fragrance. Yan Yuan raised her head and looked at him lovingly. Abo, you are so kind. Qianlong is not used to being praised like this. So he avoided looking and said nothing, and Yan Yuan got the dragon scale. I want to give it to Ning Jiyu, who is critically ill, immediately. But he didn't want Qianlong to know and be sad, so he said that he was in an emergency and couldn't eat with him. Come look for him again in the evening. On second thought, I asked Qianlong if he would be angry. Qianlong was stunned for a moment, then shook his head. Yan Yuan was so moved that she didn't know what to say. After chatting with Qianlong for a while, he hurriedly left. It's dinner time. The eunuch outside asked Qianlong if he could pass on the meal. Qianlong is sitting cross-legged on the bed and regulating his breath. I casually asked him when a Yuan would come over. Who dares to call Yan Yuan's name in this world? Apart from the queen, there is only this young master inside. From the initial panic, Xiao Detzi already very calm now, but now I still feel a little guilty when I tell lies. So hey, he said that the emperor is busy with state affairs and can't get away from it. Let Qianlong not blame. Qianlong spoke in a muffled voice to express that he did not mean to blame. But the longing in his heart made him feel uncomfortable. After a while, he asked Xiao Detzi to step aside and stop passing on the supper. Then slowly opened the skirt. I saw that the scaled wounds were only wrapped with white cloth. Mortal herbs are of no use to him and he can only beat them hard. If it were before, healing can be cured by adjusting the breath a few times with magic. It's useless now. I have never been afraid of the heavenly tribulation black dragon before become an immortal or die, no one cares anyway. Now he is starting to get scared, afraid if I die what should I do if I leave Yan Yuan alone. At the same time, Wanfeng Palace, after the dragon scales were used as medicine, Ning Zhiyu's complexion became much rosier. The imperial physician Zong's painting returns to the emperor. It won't take 30 days for the queen to wake up. Yan Yuan couldn't help but be overjoyed when she heard this. Zong Hua thanked him and prepared to leave. Yan Yuan suddenly remembered something that stopped him. Tell Zong Hua to give him the medicine he brought. These days, he has been focusing on Ning Zhiyu. Completely left Xianlong in the cold. At this time, I thought that Xianlong felt a little guilty for no reason. I thought I should spend some time with him when I go back tonight. In fact, when he was guarding Ning Zhiyu, he often thought of Xianlong. Whenever I lose my mind, thoughts will appear in my mind unconsciously. The way Xianlong laughs awkwardly, Yan Yuan deeply felt that it was wrong for her to do this. In order to get the medicine, he, acting together with Xianlong with false feelings, this already made him feel guilty towards Xianlong. What's more, he also violated his promise to Ning Zhiyu. If he continues to make mistakes, his conscience will be troubled. Therefore, even though I missed Xianlong very much these days, I still endured it. He doesn't want to make the same mistake again and again, but it's not an option to keep avoiding each other like this. Thinking for a long time, he asked Chen Yen to go to the treasury to pick out some fine jade pendants. Chen Yen took his life and left in a hurry. When I came back, the tray was neatly arranged. There are a dozen precious jade pendants for him to choose from. At a glance, Yan Yuan was struck by a piece carved with iris flowers. Oval jade pendant attracts. That jade pendant is very delicate and beautiful, especially the carving of the iris above. Yan Yuan likes it very much for no reason. He pointed at the jade pendant and said with satisfaction, "This is it." Then I asked Chen Yan carefully, "Is Xianlong okay these days?" Chen Yan's forehead reply, "Mr. Han has been staying in the palace and has not gone out. I just have a bad appetite. It doesn't take much at a time." Yan Yuan was a little dazed when he heard it. He remembered that Xianlong had a huge appetite when he was in Gyutan. Xianlong will eat up the rest of his meal. After coming back to his senses, he asked Chen Yan to order the imperial kitchen to prepare more fish and shrimps. He remembered that those were Xuanlong's favorite foods. The human emperor and Xianlong send love tokens to each other. Xianlong even pulled out his most precious reverse scale and gave it to him. The emperor took over Ni Lin and was not happy but full of sadness. He couldn't help but think of the 30 movies from before. Just pull out one piece and it will bleed so much. As for the 30 films, he hid from Xianlong several times because of guilt. This day I finally couldn't bear it anymore. I carefully selected a good jade pendant and decided to go see Xianlong. He couldn't hide any longer. It was getting dark now, since the huge imperial city was swallowed up by the night. Yan Yuan pushed open the door of the side hall of Qiankuan Palace. As soon as I stepped in, I smelled a faint cold fragrance. There was no light in the hall, so it was pitch dark and nothing could be seen. He called ABO several times, but got no response. Yan Yuan suddenly panicked. He hurriedly walked to the inner room and opened the bright yellow bed curtain. I was relieved when I saw the fallen man. He thought Xianlong was gone, and Xianlong was sleeping soundly. I didn't even notice anyone coming in. He is already quiet, and becomes even more peaceful when he is asleep. Just a handsome face. It looked too pale under the dim candlelight. Yan Yuan gently shook his shoulders. After a moment, Xianlong opened his eyes, still a little unable to react. He looked at Yan Yuan motionless. His face is so beautiful in the dim environment that it looks like a mortal. Yan Yuan sat next to him. He said softly, "Why did you go to bed so early?" But feeling unwell actually doesn't mean that I went to bed early. Instead, he slept all day. And Xianlong slowly sat up. I would like to ask Yan Yuan if he is done with his work. Or how are you doing these days? But he was stupid and in the end he only said 2 words, "No." Then unconsciously, he stretched out his hand and slowly caressed Yan Yuan's cheek. When Yan Yuan saw this, she couldn't help but choked up and said, "I'm sorry. I wanted to come back to find you that night." As he spoke, he took out the jade pendant he had prepared in advance from his sleeve. "Send it to Xianlong like a treasure," said that he specially picked this from the treasury to give to Xianlong. Xianlong picked up the jade pendant from his palm. "Ask him what this is." Yan Yuan caressed Xuanlong's cheek lovingly, patiently explained to their human race if both parties agree will give the other party a token of love. He is both happy and Xianlong naturally, we cannot avoid this common etiquette. This iris jade pendant is his token of love to Xianlong. Xianlong stared blankly at Yan Yuan and smiled. "There is an indescribable warmth in my heart." He nodded seriously. "Baby, put the jade pendant away into the secret bag." He whispered that I would take good care of it. Then he raised his hand and touched the back of his neck. It was so violent that it tore off a piece of dark dragon scales. Wipe off the blood stains on the snow-white clothes and hand them to Yan Yuan. Yan Yuan frowned and asked him blankly what he was doing. Xianlong was silent for a moment and whispered a token of love. The location of the reverse scales on the Dragon Queen's neck. He has nothing to give Yan Yuan, only the mind is the most precious thing in the whole body. This unique reverse scale is the best proof. Once he falls in love, he will never change his heart. Yan Yuan nervously pressed Xuanlong's shoulder and turned to take a look. The originally intact back of the neck is missing a piece of skin. There was a lot of blood, dyeing a large area of the clothes on the back red. Yan Yuan looked miserable and asked if it hurt. Xianlong shook his head, stubbornly stuffing the dragon scale into Yan Yuan's hand. This dragon scale is slightly different from the ones Xianlong gave Yan Yuan before. The previous one was close to a fan shape, but this one is in the shape of a crescent. The dark scales have a faint silvery luster, surprisingly beautiful. Yan Yuan looked at the dragon scales on her palm with a painful look on her face. This reminded him of those 30 tablets. This much blood bleeds after just pulling out one piece. What about 30 pieces? Xianlong pursed his lips and wanted to coax him but didn't know what to say. I could only move my lips dryly to tell him not to be angry. Yan Yuan frowned suddenly. There is a lump in the throat. He doesn't know what's wrong with him. My heart aches as if my heart has been pierced by thousands of arrows. Yu Bai said with difficulty. I'm not angry. Yushua just wanted to say that he was just feeling guilty and uneasy. Zibai moved but in the end couldn't say it out loud. Then he looked up at Xuanlong's handsome face. Just sigh, let me give you medicine. The emperor on earth was heartbroken when he saw the wound on Xuanlong's chest. Tears flowed down unconsciously. He hugged Xianlong into his arms. She screamed at the top of her lungs and said, you lied to me. You said it wouldn't hurt. Yan Yuan chose a fine jade pendant. Give it to Xianlong as a token of love. Xianlong has nothing on his body. Then he pulled out his most precious reverse scale and gave it to him. Yan Yuan saw the back of Xuanlong's neck was injured and choked with sobs. Sighing, let me give you medicine. Xianlong whispered that he didn't need to take medicine. Just wipe it casually. Yan Yuan was a little angry after hearing this. Oh, what nonsense is he talking about? Then he ordered Chen Yen to come back with some golden medicine. Carefully apply pure white medicinal powder. Spread the wine evenly on the injured area on the back of Xuanlong's neck. This is the best medicine in the palace. Hemostasis should be top-notch. But the strange thing is that he poured the whole bottle of medicine on it. It's no use. The wound still hasn't stopped bleeding. Disappear continuously. Almost the entire back of Xianlong was dyed red. Yan Yuan couldn't help but feel her throat tightening. How could heretics be like this? The location of the reverse scale is the source of the dragon's hard work. It can also be said to be a weakness. If that place is touched a little harder, the pain will be 100 times as painful as a broken finger. Not to mention tearing off the scales. How can it be cured with earthly medicine? Xuanlong's breath was a little unsteady when he spoke. Comfort him by saying that he has been strong since he was a child. It's just some blood, so he doesn't need to worry. Then he took a piece of white silk and casually rubbed it on the back of his neck. The wound is already fragile, how can it withstand such devastation? Xuanlong's face didn't show any pain at all. Yan Yuan was horrified and quickly stood up to stop him. How can you not take good care of yourself? Don't move. When Xianlong heard this, he obeyed and remained silent. It's not that he doesn't cherish himself. I was often injured when I was a child. He was beaten bloody by his mother and no one gave him medicine. I could only pick up a piece of cloth that was not too dirty and wipe the wound casually. Pain is pain, you can get over it if you endure it. Yan Yuan called the eunuch outside the palace. I brought clean silk and warm water. Xianlong watched him busy with other things. The latter first wrapped his wound with silk. The movements of those long, self-purifying fingers are also extremely gentle. Occasionally, his knuckles would accidentally touch the intact skin on the back of his neck. Xuanlong's Adam's apple trembled slightly, and his ears turned red numbly. But Yan Yuan's brows never relaxed. Carefully asked him if it hurt. Xianlong shook his head gently. Just like that, Yan Yuan wrapped his neck layer by layer. Finally, I tied a beautiful knot at the back of my neck. Yan Yuan didn't dare to look at Xuanlong's face. The guilt that faded away after one more glance swept over me again. He can be swallowed up in an instant. Yan Yuan dipped the handkerchief in warm water. Then he took Xianlong into his arms and held his hand. Carefully wipe away the remaining blood between your fingers. Then he asked him with concern how the wound on his chest was doing. Xianlong started to feel sleepy again. He held on and replied that he would be fine soon, but Yan Yuan was still worried. He threw the handkerchief back into the silver basin aside. Looking up and staring at the man's pale face, let me see. Xuanlong's erect pupils trembled slightly. It's like I'm hiding from something in the clouds. But Yan Yuan didn't give him a chance. You know I'd be worried. Let me see. The two were in a silent stalemate for a while. Xianlong lowered his head and loosened his belt to reveal the injured area. I only saw a layer wrapped around my chest. I don't know where I got this burlap from. Yan Yuan couldn't see the real injuries inside, so I sat closer to him, carefully removed the white cloth layer by layer. When he got to the last layer, Xianlong suddenly trembled, swallowed lowly. It turned out that the cloth that bound the wound had grown together with the wound. Yan Yuan raised her eyes and glanced at the man's pale face. Hard to say, please be patient. If it is not removed in time, it will be more difficult to deal with in the future. Xianlong nodded. His body shook violently with his movements. Cold sweat dripped from the forehead on the back of Yan Yuan's hands. Yan Yuan couldn't bear it anymore. Put Xianlong into his arms. In an instant, his throat was choked with sobs and his heart was as sharp as a knife. Tears flowed down unconsciously. She screamed at the top of her lungs and said, "You lied to me. You said it wouldn't hurt." Xuanlong's chest rose and fell with difficulty, just a little bit, in a low voice, but this is not the case. He just doesn't want to see Yan Yuan sad because of this. The Emperor of the world saw Xianlong for the first time. There is an inexplicable sadness in my heart. The bone-gnawing pain made him feel as if I knew the man in my previous life. He kept congratulating Xianlong. "Abo, I'm sorry, I don't want to be like this." Yan Yuan was filled with grief when she saw the wound on Xuanlong's chest. Xianlong comforted him that it only hurt a little bit. Yan Yuan did not answer after hearing this. He just silently applied the medicine to Xianlong, then carefully rewrapped the wound with good white silk by anime. Xianlong thought he was angry when he didn't speak. Animation then reached out and pulled the corner of his clothes. Anime, Adu, don't be angry. My mother used to look like this when she was angry. But Xianlong knew that Yan Yuan was the one who would be soft-hearted to him just when he didn't know what to say. Yan Yuan suddenly raised her head and leaned forward to hug him. He said in a hoarse voice, "Abo, I'm sorry, I don't want to be like this either." He repeatedly told Xianlong that he would be animated. Xianlong was stunned in animation. When I realized what Yan Yuan was saying, Xianlong was a little confused when asked, "Why am I sorry?" Yan Yuan didn't know what she was insisting on. But he just wants to get the other party's guarantee repeated. "If one day, can you forgive me?" Xianlong was silent for a long time before he lowered his eyes. "I only know that you are the best person to me in the world." Yan Yuan heard this and held Xuanlong's hand tighter. "Say it like a child acting coquettishly to an adult, then you promise no matter how big a mistake you make in the future, you must forgive me once." There were emotions in his eyes that Xianlong couldn't see, like sadness and struggle. But Xianlong didn't ask further questions. "I just said dotingly, I promise." Yan Yuan's hanging heart finally fell to the ground. Then he held Xianlong tightly in his arms. He knows that Xianlong always means what he says. Never break your promise to yourself. If you say you forgive, then you will definitely forgive. At this moment, Yan Yuan's heart was filled with indescribable gratitude and happiness. It's like a priceless treasure that I accidentally lost and found again. He doesn't know what happened to him either. When it comes to Xianlong, he always worries about gains and losses. At this moment, the depression in my heart is finally lifted. As soon as I feel good, my appetite will follow. Yan Yuan immediately ordered someone to pass the meal in. Pulling Xianlong, who had already put on a clean robe, he walked to the table. One person and one dragon sit around. There is a dazzling array of delicious food on the table. Yan Yuan took a piece of beef specially made by the palace chef and let him try it. Then he said with concern that Xianlong had lost weight after not seeing him for a few days. "Is it because the palace is not used to eating?" Xianlong shook his head and silently picked up the chopsticks. He still doesn't know how to use it. "It took me a long time to pick up the piece of beef in the bowl." Put it into your mouth tentatively. He is still not used to human food with seasonings. For him, natural, unprocessed ingredients are the most delicious. But that piece of beef didn't taste as bad as I thought. Animation. Xianlong chews a few times and then swallows it. Suddenly I felt a familiar churning feeling in my stomach, making him stand still. Yan Yuan looked at him doubtfully. "What's wrong? Isn't it delicious?" Xianlong shook his head. "Wait until the nausea wears off. Swallow the food in your mouth without changing your expression. Reviews are pretty good."